Morning, everybody. Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center, sponsored by Fieldstone Memory Care, Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers innovative and compassionate care, now accepting residents. Call 360-271-2530 to schedule a tour of Fieldstone's beautifully appointed apartments on Rolling Bay today. So thank you all for being here this morning. It stopped raining, the sun's out, a beautiful autumn day, and who more than we want to be with us than with Ann Lovejoy.
Well, thank you, Karen.
Yes.
So welcome everybody, and you're absolutely right. This morning we had a beautiful soft rain, which is really helpful because if you dig down even a few inches, it's still very dry in the garden. So we can definitely use this rainy week. And I think we're going to have a lot of these little sun breaks. This is perfect weather for planting and transplanting. It's great weather for bulb planting. It's great weather for tucking in perennials that you sort of thought you might like to see next year, or there are a lot of stuff's on sale right now too. So it's a great time to cruise the nurseries and see if you can find something fun. Actually, I highly recommend cruising the nurseries at least once a month all year round, because when you're trying to, you look at your little garden and maybe it's not very interesting in January or February. Well, you go to the nursery and find something that looks good in those months, it's going to look good all the time. And that's kind of how you make sure your garden stays lovely and lively through the year, by constant shopping. I just have to put that out there. Plus, of course, we're supporting the local economy and doing our part for carbon catch up, right? Like, so everything we plant is like a little straw that sucks down carbon and stores it in the soil. So carbon drawdown is your civic responsibility, and that means buying a lot of plants and putting them in wonderful places in your garden. And that's not so onerous. I think most of us can manage that, right?
Oh yeah, and shopping's fun. Come on.
Well, it is fun, especially when you start thinking about, who do I want to invite to my garden? And for me, it's pollinators. And so I'm always looking for stuff that it flowers all through the year. And ironically, I don't know if you remember this, my very first book in 1985 was called The Year in Bloom. Like, what was it called? Oh yeah, The Year in Bloom. And part of it was about making sure there's something for the little bees that wake up in the winter and need something to drink, right? So that's why you want to put snow crocus in right now, because those early crocus are always visited by early bumblebees and native bees. And a lot of our native bees are ground dwellers, and they will sleep all winter under the soil, not very deep either, pretty shallowly, especially the bumblebees. What happens with them is right this time of year, most of the bumblebees die, except for the pregnant young queens. And they winter over in a little hole in the ground, or in a bundle of leaves, or at the base of a clump of drying grasses. And they'll winter over, and then in the spring, they'll wake up, get busy, have their first batch of eggs. And it's pretty amazing that they have this great little cycle, but you might see a bumblebee out in January, February, March, anytime, because if it's a mild year, they'll wake up and get busy. And it's our duty to have something for them to eat. So Mahonia, Oregon grape is a great choice for that. And Oregon grape is a great one for anybody, because there's little ones that are only just a few inches high, and there's others that are 8 or 10 or 12 feet high. So, and they're evergreen, they're beautiful. They have these gorgeous, fragrant yellow flowers in the winter and spring, and they're just so cheerful. And I just feel like that's one of our best natives, not just for the pollinators and birds, but for us too, because all those yellow flowers will be followed by fat berries, which will be appreciated by a lot of the birds. So it's a great local native plant, right?
Yes. I always loved Oregon grape.
Me too. I had this wonderful experience camping one time out in the middle of nowhere in this, actually it was in Escalante, Utah, and heard this incredible buzzing sound and realized that over my head there was this solid kind of band of buzzing bees, and they were heading toward a little cave up in a cliff. And I probably stupidly climbed the cliff and found this little cave, and there was a little bush of Oregon grape, though it was probably Utah grape by that time. But and it was pretty much the only thing blooming for miles around, and every bee in town knew exactly where it was and was just heading there like a lifeline. It was so cool. These critters are brilliant, really.
Yes.
I'd like to say that anybody who's on, if you have questions, you can either put them in the chat or put your hand up, and we'll answer you. There's Christina. Because one thing that helps me a lot is knowing what you would like to know. And the more you can tell me about that, the better I can gear my conversation to helping you figure out what you're interested in. I was going to talk a little about planting bulbs, because that's something most of us are doing right about now. And the really good news about planting bulbs is that a few years ago, the Dutch growers were working with universities in the United States that had agriculture departments, and they wanted to know what really was going to be the most effective way to grow bulbs in America and how to make them more perennial. And what it turned out to be was, be lazier. Don't dig so deep. What they found was the most effective and the most sustainable way to plant bulbs was to actually they scratched up the soil, or tilled it in some instances, but we don't recommend tilling anymore. But scratch the soil, just tuck the bulbs in, put compost over the top. End of story. And for most bulbs, as long as they were covered, that was perfect. And they bloomed on time. And bulbs are pretty cool too, because they will actually pull themselves down with their roots to the depth they want to be at. But if we plant them too deep, they spend all this energy getting back up on top so that it can be where it wants to be. And that means smaller blooms, less perennial plants, especially if we make the terrible mistake of tidying them up too soon. Because we got to remember that bulbs are storage bulbs, right? So when they bloom in the spring and they look so beautiful, you can snap their head off when they fade to prevent them from setting seeds, because that's energy we'd rather have go back down the stems into the storage root. So pop the seed head off, but leave the leaves and let them discolor, get browns, get floppy. If you can't stand it, you can gently push them over sideways and put a little airy light mulch on top, and then you don't have to look at the dying foliage. But that will keep your bulbs coming back year after year instead of being very expensive annuals. I think it's worth knowing.
You know, sometimes I see the very tops of the bulbs that they're not completely, so that's normal.
Yeah, a lot of bulbs prefer to have a little, like Madonna lilies will pull themselves out of the ground to have a little bit showing, or those naked ladies, Nerines and Liriopes, those are going to stick themselves out of the ground a little bit too. That's just, it's natural for bulbs. If you feel like they're sticking out because erosion has washed away topsoil and there's other stuff in the bed where you can see roots and things, that's a different story. And that means you need to stabilize that bed or that soil with a little more compost. One thing I like to do in the fall when I'm cleaning up beds is be really gingerly about cleaning up, because there are, like I was saying earlier, there's not just slumbering bees, but there's beetles and ants and butterflies and all kinds of soil dwelling creatures creatures that need to hibernate in the soil. And if we are too tidy, we're taking away, here they work for us all summer long, right? They're pollinating, they're helping stuff grow in our gardens, and then they snuggle down in bed and we like rudely come out with a leaf blower or something and blow them to hell. That's not taking care of our pollinator pals. We got to be kinder, right? So tidy with a very light hand, and remember that layering the leaves on top of your beds is probably the absolute best thing you can do, both for the soil and for all those pollinators that we want to encourage. And if you can't stand the look, put the leaves on and then put just a little bit of compost on top of that, but not too much, because a big heavy layer of bark mulch will kill them, right? Just go light. The other great thing to think about is that actually the best way to really promote the well-being of our pollinators is not to clean up very much at all. How great news is that, right? Rather than sterilizing your garden and making it look like, it just got a horrible haircut, just let everything kind of die back down. When we leave the flowers in place, the dying flower heads are often the place you can sometimes even see little butterfly cocoons right snuggled under the head of a flower because that's a stable place for them. A lot of butterfly cocoons look like a little chip of wood, or sometimes they look like tiny squids, kind of conical at the base and then getting a little bigger, and they'll be attached by very thin, kind of almost glue looking, like they super glued themselves to a stalk, or even sometimes the side of your house or an old stump. But those sort of little wood chips are actually like the overwintering cocoon of Western swallowtails, butterflies, for instance, or some of our beautiful morning cloaks. So going light is is a good way to be a good co-gardener for right for our little patches. So,
Yeah. Oh, yep. Just taking care of it, taking care of everything.
yeah, and the thing to remember about taking care of everything is we don't grow plants. We help plants grow themselves. They don't really need us unless we put them in the wrong place and are choosing something that's really fairly inappropriate. Plants don't actually need us all that much, not as much as we need them, that's for sure. So really what we're trying to do is create a good habitat, not just for our plants, but for the pollinators as well, and for the birds and the other creatures. But a lot of that involves leaving things alone, being much less aggressive um, about what we call maintenance and nature calls destruction. It's just interesting to think like that. And if you have neighbors who have a hard time with that, there are wonderful signs you can buy that say things like wildlife refuge, right? Bird sanctuary. And you put those in your yard and it helps people understand what they're seeing is very, very natural. And again, walking in the woods, I know I've said this before, when you walk in the woods and you look at the bracken ferns turning sort of bone pale and golden leaves falling and dying and all this beautiful leaf litter mounting up and the perennials getting brittle and skinny, nobody comes and tidies those up.
Mhm.
And because they don't, that environment remains rich and vibrant. And I've probably told you this story too. I've had more than one occasion where I've been called into somebody's garden where they have a woodland garden with a lot of native plants, but they're just failing after a few years. And I come in and it's like, it looks like someone's scrubbed it with a toothbrush. And trying to explain that leafy litter is the lifeblood of the forest, that even hollow trees and dead trees actually promote an amazing amount of plant and creature life.
Mhm.
That we need to learn that the hand of man is not always the best uh, the best influence in our gardens and in our landscapes, right? Modern landscaping, if you look at a lot of those magazines, it's really a lot about scalping things to the bone.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, people think what they see is right. And there's very few magazines about leaf litter. I've never seen a magazine that posted fabulous pictures of compost. But maybe if we trained our eye that way a little bit better, we'd have more compassion for our gardens and the critters that will share the planet with us, right?
This is
Yes.
Christina. Can you hear me okay? 'Cause I have
Yes.
my headphones on. Okay, great. So I love the leaf litter. I'm all for it. I think it's going to keep some moisture in the ground. My question is with regards to ground covers, because I don't want to rip those up, right? So do you put the leaves just over the ground covered plants as well?
Oh, that's a great question, Christina. It depends on the size of the ground covers. Like if they're little low creeping strawberries or something like that, your best bet is to shred the leaves first if you have that ability. And you can buy little hand shredders that are not as huge as if you don't, like I don't have a lawn, so I don't have anywhere to mow. I can't mow my leaves, but you can get a little shredder that will grind them up for you. And then you can put that over ground covers. And that's actually a great thing to do. Another good thing to do in the fall with ground covers is if they're getting overgrown and they're kind of getting old and they're sort of dying out in patches, is to remove about a third of them in plugs randomly, like plug, 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 pull them out, fill their spots with compost and leaf litter where you just pulled that plug, and they'll fill back in and you'll have a renewed ground cover that looks rich and nice again. And usually the plugs, take out the crappiest looking bits for the plugs, right? But those plugs can often be planted in a pot or in a flat. You can grow them on and use them somewhere else or donate them to another garden or a gardener. But when plants are overgrown like that, like a ground cover that's been in place for maybe 15 or 20 years, sometimes they just need a little more resuscitation. You can also put down a scattering of humic acid, granulated humic acid, which is sort of the active ingredient of compost. And by scattering that in a ground cover, and you can read the application rates on the bag, it kind of depends on the granulation size, but just scattering a few handfuls of that over like long established ground covers will perk them right back up too. The other thing to think about is in like woodland gardens or shady gardens, you might start choosing ground cover plants that are taller, like those, some of the Oregon grapes that are 2 feet tall, make actually wonderful spready ground covers that are not 2 inches tall. I think we sort of have this idea that ground covers are ground huggers, but really it can mean anything that could cover the ground, like sword ferns make great ground cover, right? And they space themselves beautifully. Sword ferns can live hundreds of years unless we tidy them up all the time. You know, those leaves are meant to last for 4 or 5 years. And the ones that are turning brown and kind of falling to the side, those are the ones you can take off. But rather than taking them away, you can, what we do is called chop and drop. You chop them up and drop them around the plant because those leaves are still packed with nutrients that are designed exactly for the support and maintenance of the plant you took them off of. So chopping and dropping, unless they're grossly like infected, which usually fern leaves are almost never, that's really the healthiest way to keep your garden or your woodland looking great. And it may seem like it takes a long time, but you know, what a beautiful meditative practice to take you outside. If you went out and did that for 20 minutes a day, half an hour a day, work your way through the winter, there's no hurry about it. Just that's a wonderful sort of motivator to help you get outside again. And, you know, we know now that one of the healthiest things about gardening is that handling plants and handling the soil releases this bacterium vaccae that is actually a natural antidepressant. And it has pretty long-lasting effects on humans, like up to 2 weeks. So it's a great way to kind of help yourself out of a blue mood, is to just make yourself get up, go outside, even if it's drizzling a teeny little bit, it won't kill you. Right? I'm always amazed that, like, if I have an overdose of news, the best thing I can do is take myself out into the garden and start puttering. And then pretty soon I feel so much better. I mean, don't any of you have that experience?
Every day.
Yeah.
Every day.
It's like nature's antidepressant is nature.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Why are we searching for things when they're right there in front of us and it's free?
It's free, exactly. And
Yeah.
I think, you know, this whole great pause is kind of weird because a lot of people sort of burrowed indoors and didn't go out at all. You know, you may still want to protect yourself, and I certainly understand that, but being out in the garden is a whole different deal. And that's really something to remember for your own physical, mental, and emotional well-being and health. Being outside is our best friend, really.
That's where we're supposed to be.
It is. Putting ourselves back in relationship to nature is, you know, still one of those things a lot of us have to work on. It's funny to me that there's still people I know who don't want to get dirty. Like, that's so crazy. Though I have to remind myself before I come indoors, I have to roll my sleeves back down and shake everything off, because otherwise I come in and there's this little trail of litter behind me. And if I shake my hair, there's like, oh, look at the little leaves and things. So I try to brush off outside first.
I like the way you live.
Yeah, exactly. It's living in the natural environment is so healthy. And we're so fortunate in this beautiful, beautiful Northwest that we really can be outside almost all year round. When I first moved here from Massachusetts, I was flabbergasted that you really could garden in the winter.
Mhm.
And there was a really small book called Winter Gardening in the Pacific Northwest by Binda Coldbrook. And I'd never seen anything like that, because in the Massachusetts, there was no winter gardening to be done. It was all about, you know, berries and bark and what stuff looks like under the snow. You know, what kind of shape of a lump are you going to make with that plant? But here it was like, what are you talking about? You can garden all winter? Yeah. And Binda was this amazing pioneer growing all kinds of things to find out what really would thrive. And of course, one of the things you could plant right now, if you felt like it, was peas. You can get a second crop of peas, even at this time of year. They'll come up pretty fast. And a lot of times, if it's a mild year, and we have really no idea whether it's going to be or not, but I think part of the the great mystery of living here is that it's always a fresh experience. What kind of winter will we have? Who knows? But it's, even if your peas don't do a whole lot in terms of producing peas, they're still going to be grabbing nitrogen out of the air and other minerals as well, and storing them down in the ground in little nodules on their roots. So those peas will be a great cover crop for you, even if they're not very productive in terms of your vegetable plate, right?
Right.
And that's why Austrian field peas are such a good cover crop for around here. They're fast growing. They're got deep roots, actually. They, like fava beans also, they really put down strong, big roots. And that means that all the nutrients that they're storing are going to go way down into the soil. A lot of people suggest that you till them under. I don't do that anymore because tilling is really a fairly destructive process. But instead, again, it's sort of a chop and drop. Or if you have a weed whacker, you can kind of whack the whole mess. Just when they get about 18 inches high, whack them and let them regrow again. And you'll get 2 or 3 cycles of that through the winter. And then when spring comes, you can cut them to the ground, or you can pull them out gently, or you can just cut them, like I say, and then do the chop and drop thing, and they'll almost melt into the soil. And those roots that have the nitrogens and other minerals stored in them will kind of melt into the soil too. And you can just plant right near them and there'll be no interference at all. So I love doing that kind of nitrogen-based cover crop. Another one that's fun is crimson clover, an annual clover with really pretty large red flowers. And that one gets about 12 to 18 inches anyway, so you don't have to weed whack it, you just let it rip. And there's another one that often will bloom kind of sporadically through the winter. And those random bees will find the flowers, and so sometimes will the hummingbirds. You'll see Anna's hummingbirds on those crimson clover flowers, which are pretty big and high, you know, because they're 12 to 18 inches off the ground. So they don't have to like crawl around on the ground. They don't really like to land that much when they're feeding. But that's another living creature to think about through the winter. I love to put in a lot of hardy fuchsias in, especially the smaller ones go beautifully in pots and containers if you don't have a lot of room. And they just bloom and bloom and bloom and bloom. In a sheltered environment, they'll bloom year round. Maybe not heavily, but enough that the hummingbirds will come to rely on them to some degree. Yeah. Also, the pineapple sage. Is anybody growing pineapple sage? That's one of those ones with very fragrant leaves. You can make, you can chop it into fruit salad and things like that. But the flowers are red and come in spikes. And it's often one that blooms really long and late. And in a protected place will often bloom right into the winter. Hummingbirds love those flowers. And so they'll come and find them, and you'll see them flitting in and out all through the winter. And sometimes even in the snow, there'll still be some flowers and they'll find them, which is neat.
Pineapple sage.
Yeah, pineapple sage.
Yes. Does it have a little bit of a pineapple flavor?
It does, kind of. I mean, you have to use your imagination a little bit, but it's kind of faintly citrusy the way pineapple can be, right?
Right. And I can put it on my ham and pineapple pizza, right?
Yes, you could.
And
Joan.
what is the pineapple what?
Pineapple sage.
What?
Sage. S-A-G.
Sage.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. It's one of those kind of wonderful, easy plants that loves this climate.
How about a pot plant of that?
Yeah, big pot though, because they get big. They can be 3 or 4 feet high. So like a whiskey, you know, a half barrel is perfect.
I've got one, and I'm wondering if that's what it is.
Oh,
I'll find out. I have to taste it. Would I taste the leaf? Or
yes, crinkle the leaves, and if they smell kind of sweet and almost a little bit citrusy, you'll be able to say, oh yeah, that's probably what it is, and then take a little bite of it. Anytime you're eating a plant that you don't know what it is, you don't just put a whole leaf in your mouth. One of the signs that a plant is toxic is it will make your lips numb.
Ooh.
Yeah. And so before you start chomping and go, that looks tasty, you're like, yeah, if I don't know what that is. I better just take it easy. And you can also, of course, take a leaf and a flower and go inside, or take your phone out and say, I think this might be pineapple sage, so I'm going to look up flowers image, pineapple sage flower image. And then you'll come up and you go, yeah, that does look like that, right? The other thing that I sometimes do when I'm planting stuff and I don't want to forget what it is I'll take a piece of that blue painter's tape and write on it with a Sharpie and put it on the back of the pot, where it doesn't show necessarily, but it won't fade in the sun. And that way, when you pick the pot up and you're like, what the heck is this? Oh yeah, it is that.
Oh, that's
Right.
a great idea.
Yeah, it saves a lot of head scratching.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a fabulous idea.
It's a good idea to do that too when you're planting, like if you're scattering seeds in fall. Of course, this is a perfect time to sow seeds of hardy annuals. And I always talk about things like calendulas because they bloom all winter and they're so beautiful, these shaggy little stars and citrusy colors. But if you're not sure what you're planting, like you might be putting out Nigella, that love in a mist, or maybe you're going to Sweet Alyssum or Clarkia, our native farewell to spring, and you're not exactly sure what they're going to look like, when you scatter it, put a little 4-inch pot of soil and put a little pinch of those same seeds in there and put that blue tape on it and say, this is Nigella or this is Clarkia, and put it near where you're scattering your seeds. And that way, when they come up, you're like, oh gosh, is that a weed? Or is that the thing I grew on purpose? You can pick up that little pot and see if they look the same, right? And then it saves you ripping everything out and then going, oh, wait, I think that was what I wanted, right? And going back to the compost and picking up, no, that doesn't work very well. But little labels are very handy. But I found the crows love those little white ones that you stick into pots, and they take off. They get all over the garden. So the tape stays, and it's pretty waterproof because it's painter's tape.
Mhm.
I mean, it won't last for many years, but you only want it for one season most of the time.
Right. Crows.
Crows,
They like shiny things.
they do like shiny things. And they're also just curious and interested. So they'll come in and see what you've been up to and sort of check things out. But yeah, some people have tried metal tags and found that they disappear even faster than the white plastic ones.
Yeah. Yeah. They are fun though. I love crows.
I do too. And we found at the library for many years, we did the Friday Tidy. We've been doing that for 23 years now or something. And for many years, we had this resident batch of crows, and they got to know what time I would go in and get this. When Cindy Harrison was the librarian, she always had a snack for us. And the staff carried that on right up till COVID, really. And we would go in and get it and bring it out and have a little picnic outside. And the crows would come down and start telling us that they would like a share. It was really funny. And I read some things that crows do recognize specific people. They know people who are kind to them, and they know people who are not kind to them. And they knew that we would be giving them crackers and stuff. So they showed up. I thought it was neat.
Yeah. Yeah. They're very bright.
Yeah. And they even have babysitters. Crow moms, when they go hunting, they'll get the junior crows to babysit the nestlings. Don't you think that's great? That's really smart.
That's cool. I always try to have the crows not blame me for the things my dog does to them, because she barks.
You can explain. They're pretty smart. You can say, sorry.
I do. I said, I keep her away.
Put some crackers out. They love sharing. So if you have a piece of stale bread or something like that, you can sort of call them crows. And they have language. Like if they say 5 caws means let's all gather here, or 3 caws means where are you? But, they have their own language.
Yeah.
Joan, do you have a question?
And no, I wanted to tell you that in Montana, I had 3 crows and they would come out and watch me eat. And then when I was finished, I'd say, goodbye, I'm finished. And they'd actually turn around and leave.
Wow.
If you can believe that.
No, I totally believe that. They're very smart.
Yes, they are very smart.
But that's interesting.
And I have one here on the island that wants to do that, but I told him, no, I'm not feeding you at all, so because who knows who's going to get it. Anyway.
one,
That's my 2 cents.
that's great. I love that. We one time, one of our cats one time came, I heard him yowling and coming up these wooden stairs we had, and it would be wow, thump, wow, thump, thump, wow, thump. And I got to the top and he had a pork chop. And I thought a crow must have pulled it off somebody's barbecue and dropped it because it was too heavy. And the cat found it and was bringing it home with great pride. And I just thought the crow was like, "Rah, rah, rah." Give it back. I thought that was pretty funny.
Yes.
But yeah, they're hilarious animals, really.
Yes. They know how to gang up on eagles also that threaten their nest.
Because they're so much more agile in flight. Yeah.
Yes. Boy, they really do a good job of keeping the eagles under control.
Apparently that was part of the inspiration for some of the Star Wars battles,
Oh, wow.
right? Little fast ones against great big, not very agile ones.
Right. So
Right.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So does anyone have a question about what to be doing in the garden right now if you want to be doing something? Because I know for pots and things, this is a really good time. If you've had annuals in pots and the annuals are dying off, again, if they seem to offer really nice possible nesting places, hollow stems that might attract bees, or shaggy heads where a butterfly might want to attach something, then you might just leave them. But if really they just slump to mush, then you can dump the whole thing. And really, it's a good idea to do that. Put the soil in your compost or find a bed or take it somewhere where you can, if you're in an apartment and you don't have a place to do that, take a little at a time in your bag and scatter it around in beds near you, and then refresh the soil, but also wash that pot out because salts can build up from fertilizers and things. And then that can be maybe not quite what your plant wants next time. Right. So it's a great time to kind of wash your plants, let them air out, put them in the sun, get them clean. And then when you start again, they'll be a good new home. It's always tempting with large pots to try to recycle at least some of the soil. And you can do that maybe once or twice, but after a while, you got to know that bottom soil is pretty exhausted and often it's anaerobic and not very wholesome anymore. So one thing I like to do when I've got a big deep pot that I'm going to have something fairly permanent in is mix in some activated charcoal, like the kind that you would use in a fish tank. But there's also horticultural charcoal. It's sort of the same thing that you can usually get at nurseries. And you mix that into the bottom third of a large container, and it will actually capture some of the toxins and heavy metals or anything like that. It's great to use that in a garden bed where you're not too sure about maybe if some of the compost might have contaminants of pesticides as well as heavy metals. Sorry, I had oral surgery this weekend. My mouth doesn't work the way it usually does. So I sometimes get sort of stuck. My jaw is like, eh, eh. And if it sounds funny, that's why.
You're creaking.
Creaking. Preview of coming attractions.
So any suggestions? I'm going to be moving a bunch of pots over to Paulsbo soon here. So any suggestions?
Yes. For one thing, when you do that, if you can wait and do them on the last load.
Okay.
Then they won't get bumped and banged around with a bunch of stuff. And also take a little time and figure out where you want to put them. And if you can, waiting a little helps you sort of say, we need to take a few minutes, walk around this property and see where the most sheltered place is. Make sure it's near water, because you never know if it's going to be one of those dry winters when you're going to actually have to water. And things in pots are especially vulnerable to that. And I know it always seems weird to people when I say you might have to water in the winter here. Sometimes that's true, especially for large containers, right? Which can really dry out. So make sure you find a sheltered place. If you have things that you think are a little tender, make Bob give you a part of the garage.
Okay.
Because garages are a great place to overwinter things like hanging fuchsia baskets or those, big color bowls that have a lot of perennials mixed in.
Mm-hmm.
You might not want to be outside necessarily, but if they're tender perennials like verbenas and things, those tumblers, they often, or even weirdly, sometimes we get a mild enough winter, the petunias will winter over.
Oh, wow.
I had those gorgeous black and white double petunias winter over 2 years for me. Because they were under the covered porch, but not in a, I don't have a garage, but that's pretty amazing. So it's
Yeah.
always worth a try if it's something like that that you kind of want to carry on. And if there's a place to hang them from, I don't know if sometimes they have beams or water pipes and stuff like that, you can hang those baskets up and then they won't get either kicked over or found by mice.
Yes.
Because that is another problem sometimes, that sometimes the rodents will get after our bulbs, especially, and squirrels are bad for that because they're looking for things to, make their own little winter stashes of. And I can't even tell you how many times I've found peanuts in the shell instead of crocus, say. But there's one kind of crocus that squirrels do not eat, and it's called Crocus Thomasinianus, and it's an early, or Tommy. It's an early snow crocus type, and they come in 5 or 6 colors or a nice color mix. And those are great perennializers. A friend of mine, did anyone know Margaret Ward? Do you remember her at all? She was the most wonderful gardener on the island, and just such a character. And she had planted a packet of Tommy crocus, she said, in the 1920s, and they spread so many. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of them in the 1980s and 90s, because they, as she said, benign neglect basically is your key to perennializing a lot of bulbs. And it was under big trees that were so shady that lawn didn't really do very well. So mostly they were kind of through moss or straggly lawns. And it was amazing to see that in springtime. So Tommies are good bulbs to plant if you have squirrel problems like that.
I have a question about a tree that we have recently adopted. Sheila might know what I'm talking about. We've named her Dolores because she's very sad. And I wish I knew what kind of tree it was, but it's the kind of tree where if you rub the leaves, it smells like peanut butter.
Oh,
do you know what I mean? It was really pretty. Our neighbor had one and we thought, oh, wouldn't that be nice to plant in, whatever spot? And we were asking one of the neighbors if they knew what kind of tree it was, and because we were thinking of getting one. And the neighbor said, well, I've got a shoot that's growing up into my property that I was about to dig out. So let me give that to you. So we have this sad, sorry little thing. It's probably about 4 feet tall. I'm not sure. But it's been, removed from its mother tree. So it's not getting that help now. And it just had, however big of a root wad that was planted in there. And if you have any advice on what we can do to help it along its way, that would be great. Our neighbor Rob said, well, if this one doesn't make it, I've got another. but I don't know.
I was just looking up because I couldn't remember the name. It's Clarodendron.
Clarodendron, thank you.
Yeah, and it's not really a tree. It's more of a shrub, and it is a suckering shrub. And so it wants to be out in the open, but it likes a little afternoon shade. It doesn't need full sun necessarily.
Okay, we should probably move it then.
Oh.
It's in a very sunny spot.
Yeah, they like a little shade. And they are apt to get pretty good size, like 6-8 feet, but they'll be bushy rather than a single trunk. You'll start to see others, and don't cut them off. That's what they're supposed to be doing. Okay. But yeah, and they're actually really attractive, really pretty plants that I'm trying to see if there's a picture of the,
Yeah, we just like, just all the different things that it does over the season. It's just so pretty.
They're gorgeous. They're beautiful, and they're really easy. Once you get them going, you don't need to do hardly anything to them, which is another bonus.
I like that.
Yeah. I
might have to get an umbrella.
Oh, you don't have any shade?
Well, that spot doesn't really get any shade. It's pretty full sun. So we should maybe pick something else.
Or leave it there for a while and think about, maybe there's another place to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, I'd love to keep it because it's so pretty.
So I have raspberries that didn't have a great year. I cut back all of the canes that were fruiting this year, but left the other canes that are growing for next year. And in addition to leaves, which I normally put on there, I put some like compost. Anything else I should think about to make them happy over the winter?
I would put out a little humic acid, granules of humic acid, because part of what may be happening is that soil is kind of depleted and the texture of that soil in your front yard isn't that great either. So, or it didn't look like it to me. Sorry.
They've had good years and bad years there.
Yeah. And this was for some people a pretty good raspberry year, and other people did not have a good raspberry year. And so part of it might have been were the pollinators around. One thing I like to do if you are, you have cane fruits is make sure they're not too crowded. And if they're too crammed close, you might want to take out some of the older ones and let the younger one, just take them out completely. Don't just cut them back. But if they're too close together, nobody gets a chance to really thrive, right? So that is one possibility, but also you might scatter some seeds of like calendulas and sweet William, sweet alyssum, clarkia, the things I was talking about before. They're great pollinator plants, and they will be blooming long time. And you sow them now, they'll be blooming early in the spring. And when the raspberries are in bloom, they'll bring in pollinators. And sometimes what can happen is those crowded plants don't get well pollinated because they're just kind of jammed together and not very, the flowers aren't that big either.
And they'll already be on the pollinators map.
Yeah,
You'll know they're there.
exactly. So that's just a good way to kind of renovate. But kind of like with the ground covers, if you take out about a third of the oldest plants, and always look for sort of ones that look woody or gnarly or, not that great, and take those out. And if you see some that look a bit skimpy, you might give them a little, I wouldn't put fertilizer on them now, but you might put slow release, like alfalfa pellets. That's the kind of thing I use sometimes in the winter. Unmedicated alfalfa pellets. You can get them at feed stores, but you don't want the ones that have the medication in them. But they are a good slow release of nitrogen and they have some minerals and stuff. And also some kelp meal is good. When you feel like maybe one of the issues is our soils are not always super well mineralized, that's a way to kind of make sure that those micronutrients get replenished.
Well, given that we're talking about my miserable dirt in the front yard, I could put that under probably any of the beds there that are.
Or all, yeah. Wouldn't hurt if you did it to all of them. I think
I can attest for the alyssum because I have it planted below our blueberry bushes and it works.
Yeah.
It brings in the bees.
It definitely does.
And it's pretty.
And it's fragrant. It smells like honey.
Oh,
What's
yeah.
not to love, right?
Yeah, so.
And when they dry up, you just pull up the old plant and shake it around like a salt shaker around your yard, wherever you want it to grow, and you'll have them forever.
Yep.
I mean, I love plants like that.
Me too. Less work, the better.
Exactly. And it's sharing, it's something we can offer very inexpensively and easily to our pollinator pals. And that's something I try to remember all the time. Like, it isn't always enough to just not over clean, but it's, we want to actively offer nutrients and support, which is also kind of leads me into saying it's also a good time if you have hummingbirds. This is a great time to get those feeders out, and you can bleach them really good because you're not going to be using them for a while, but make sure they're super, super clean in every part. And then I always like to have at least 2, because if we get those cold snaps where it freezes over, sometimes they're up at dawn and they're, relying on you because they need to eat about every 15 or 20 minutes. So again, the pineapple sage, the hardy fuchsias, the Oregon grapes are all going to be great hummingbird friends, but those feeders are also going to be important. Last year, I don't know if you remember, there was a real cold snap, I think in January, where they froze. And I went out and I had a tub nearby with a lid on it. And on the top of the lid, there was a frost and there were little hummingbird footprints in it, right under the hummingbird feeder. And when I came out, they were waiting for the hummingbird food. And I felt terrible. I was like, okay, I'm going to get another one so that I don't ever have to have none. So you can put one out midday, replace and refresh and keep washing them clean. And I just use vinegar on them in the season when they're being in active use, but I always try to bleach them before they go back out again. just to be sure we're not introducing any horrible pathogens to them.
Right. Oh, Madeline has a question.
Yeah. Hi. My question is about bone meal in planting bulbs. Is that something that you think we should do? I've read it when I was in Michigan. That was one of the things you did, was put bone meal down in the bowl. What do you think?
You don't really need to. It depends a lot on the kind of soil you have, but bulbs do fine in ordinary good soil. They, the bone meal thing was one of the ways people thought might help the perennialized bulbs. But in fact, it's really usually more attracting to cats and dogs. It's like putting fish meal down. That turns out to be like party picnic for all kinds of pets. So yeah, I don't use bone meal. Another reason I stopped using bone meal some time ago is because there were some pretty horrifying incidents of mad cow disease being passed around because they were, when animals had to be slaughtered, they sold them to the rendering factories and so forth, and they were being made into pet food and into bone meal. And those prions were still present. So wow. I was just like, unless you're really well provenanced and you know exactly where all that stuff comes from, I really don't use that.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, you don't really need it.
All right, thank you.
Right?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And if I can just go back on the bulbs, like
sure.
the key thing is don't plant them deep.
Yeah,
okay.
And pointy side up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep, there we go.
If you're not sure, like with hardy cyclamen, sometimes they're these flat little cake looking things. And if you can't really tell, and sometimes unless they start to bud up, but usually the flowers will come off the smoother surface. And if there's any little hairy twiddly bits, those are usually the roots. But if you're not really sure, you can plant them on their side, kind of.
Okay.
And they'll pull themselves the way that they need to go. And they should be exposed. They do not want to be covered up. If they get covered too deep, they'll stop blooming. And then, what's the point? But the fun thing about hardy cyclamen is you see them all over the place now. You can often see where ants have carried the seeds and made little trails. They love the seeds and they take them away to feed their babies and stuff. But they drop the seeds here and there. So you'll see these little wandering trails where there's a little cyclamen plant here and a little one there and another one there. Because when those, the flowers are kind of reflexed, and when they get pollinated, they go upright and then they screw themselves like that. And then they literally make a screw into the ground and then they open and blow up like pow underneath the ground. And so some of it gets scattered at that level too. It's pretty fun to watch. I mean, it's slow, but if you look at them every few days, you'll see they're in a different stage of that. So
that's good.
Put them on a time-lapse camera or something.
Yeah, actually there are some videos like that, but even just, making a point of looking at them every few days. I have it's what's meant to be, I thought it was supposed to be a Thanksgiving cactus, but it seems to be sort of holiday carefree. And my granddaughter's been watching it with me, and it's just been amazing how 2 weeks ago, the flower buds were like pinhead size. And then every time she comes, every couple days, she's watching them get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And she's never really watched the sequence of that before. And it's been so fun to kind of, now she's starting to draw them like, oh, Granny, they look like shrimp. They do kind of look like shrimp, don't they? But, just helping all of us connect more to the natural world by those observations indoors and out is so rich, right?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. How fun is that? So I didn't realize cyclamens did that.
Now the ones with the really big flowers that you get like at the grocery store and stuff, those are often not very hardy species. Most of the hardy ones have pretty small flowers and are smaller, but they have gorgeous leaves, beautiful patterns, silvery speckles and spots and stripes. And you can pick the ones that have the nicest leaves. One of the gardeners at Bloedel told me, maybe I've told this story before, I don't know, that when Prentice Bloedel was planting one of the areas, he had them buy like 10,000 and they planted them all out, and he just like threw away the bulbs that weren't pretty enough, that didn't have nice enough foliage, and kept the ones with the coolest foliage. So the gardeners were like, well, I'll take that. But, you can certainly do that on a small scale. And if you do, you'll get all the offspring will have more and more interesting foliage too, because you have kind of created a hybridization program.
Right,
Fun, right?
right.
The ones that bloom now usually can be like rose or soft pink or slightly lavender or white. And I have all those different ones in my, I'm growing them in big shallow pots, wide shallow pots. And I tuck them out of the way in the summer when they're dormant. They can be dry. In fact, they'd rather be dry. I just put them you can put them under a potting table or some out of the way place and then bring them out in the early autumn, like when the leaves start falling, bring them outside and they'll start coming back to life and putting out those beautiful leaves and flowers. And they're so much easier to see in a little pot that you can put on something, like on a little garden table or something, and admire them. Bending over isn't what it used to be.
Exactly. How about primroses?
Oh, yeah. Actually, I don't know if any of you have been to BPA, you might have noticed that there was a row of little red maples with primroses all underneath, hundreds and hundreds of them. Well, they got dug up and I had permission to go gather them. So a couple days ago, I went and got maybe 50 or 100 of them and planted them in a community garden here. And I have a couple pots for the senior center too. And the next day I went back and they had already been dug up, and they decided they weren't going to be able to save those maples because it was going to cost like $1,500 each to get them out. But the garden crew said, nah, we can do this. And so they were there yesterday digging them up themselves, and they took the trees to, one of them has kind of a farm, and he made a big holding bed to put the maples in so that they'll at least go somewhere, but maybe they can even come back. But when I was like, oh, where's the primroses? They're like, oh yeah, you see those dirt piles? They're in there, go for it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's like, what?
I did do a bunch more though, but they're gorgeous. But this is a great time to thin overcrowded clumps because they'll often make sort of bigger and bigger and bigger in cushions. But then you'll find that the center starts to get woody and maybe not as productive. If you dig those up, you can sort of snap off the very small pieces that have flowers and some roots and separate them, and then you'll get a bigger cushion that will all be sort of refreshed. And some they don't all do that. Sometimes they just get bigger plants, but they don't make the little colonies. But the colonial ones are, this is a great time to spread them out a little bit. And again, refresh soil and spacing them not too far apart so that they can make a nice colony makes a really pretty impression.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just...
Go, Megan.
Oh, there's Megan. Hi, Megan.
Hey, Katie. I've had this question for a while. So we have a rhubarb bed and a raspberry bed. Our raspberries were really prolific this summer. It was really great. But in terms of thinning, they say that for rhubarb, you're supposed to leave the roots of some, like the stalks even. And raspberries, how do you keep those healthy? You can't rotate them, obviously. You could thin them, but this is the first year that the berries have been prolific.
So yeah, we did talk about raspberries a little bit earlier because Reed has raspberries that aren't doing so well. So if you get really extra ones, you can give them to Reed. But but you do see that often, that a young raspberry bed will take a few years to get going, and once it's established, they'll fruit really nicely, and then they start to decline because they're getting too crowded. And refreshing the soil can mean removing about a third of the oldest clumps completely, and then even replacing some of because they often throw out their side bits, right? They're cane throwers, so that they're going to keep spreading. And you just want to make sure there's maybe a hand width between each clump so that they're not all crowded up. And then you can put in things like what we talked about, some kelp meal, some alfalfa pellets, slow release natural ingredients that are not going to pump them full of, try to make them burst into growth at this time of year, but help promote root growth, which is really the key to making them happy. But the kelp meal is good too because of all the minerals and things. Lots of times if the raspberries are kind of small and maybe they're not a little bit flat tasting, the compost will help them store more sugars, which bricks the natural sugars in all fruit. So that's a good way to go. I also would put down a little bit of the granulated humic acid, which you can just scatter on the soil and then water it in. And that will help open the soil if you have heavy, difficult soil, like some of us do. That will help the soil texture and quality. It's not a nutrient in the sense that it's a fertilizer. There's a little bit of nitrogen, but not really very much. It's mostly more about soil conditioning, which we can all probably benefit from. But also for Reed, I was saying to scatter seed of early annual bloomers and put it, if you scatter the seed now, they'll be earlier to come into bloom than ones that you try to plant in the spring or from seed. So what did I talk about? Calendulas, Sweet Alyssum, especially those, because Sweet Alyssum is like a magnet for all kinds of pollinators, not just bees. And so I always use that one because everybody seems to like it. Butterflies, moths, even, everybody. So thinking of a raspberry patch as permanent means think about permaculture and how you would kind of close the nutrient loop. Like when we take away the fruit, you want to put back some compost or some kelp meal, right? So that you're replenishing and it's not, and taking away a raspberry is not like taking away a pumpkin, but still it adds up over time and it's a percentage of that plant that's going away and not being returned to the soil, right? Mm-hmm. So making sure they get refed. Now with rhubarb, the plants can last decades. So unless they're grossly overgrown, you don't really need to divide them. But if you do need to, and there's sort of ancient giant monarchs, then you could dig them up and split them, probably with an axe, into smaller clumps and reset those. Give them each like 3 to 4 feet of, or even more. Sometimes they can be 5 or 6 feet across if they're happy and healthy. But yeah, when you harvest, especially a young plant that hasn't been in the ground more than a couple of years, you would take only no more than maybe 20 to 30% of the stalks, because the plant needs those leaves to replenish itself. And then as the plants grow older, you can take more and more and take up to half. But especially in the first few years when they're kind of more vulnerable, you don't want to hit them too hard. That makes sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look at the time, Anne. Wow. Oh, I know everybody has questions. Does anybody else have another question before we go? No? Yeah. Well, it was very informative. Always great suggestions, especially with the blue painter tape on the back.
Yeah.
Boy, that's going to be happening around here. So thank you so much for that. Always good suggestions. So, well, thank you all for joining us today, and hope and get out. And well, it's getting a little rainy again out there, but we need it.